right, perfect. Bonjour everyone, good evening. My name is Zoe and I'm a member of the Native American Heritage Month Planning Committee. Before we get started with today's event, I would like to acknowledge the Anishinaabe community and the Three Fires Nation's land on which we stand. As a member of the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe, I find it extremely important to acknowledge Michigan's foundation, our indigenous people. This land shows us how we should take care of it and how it should take care of us. I'd also want to point out this is our first event for Native American Heritage Month 2020 calendar with the theme of indigenous activism through different lenses. We are very excited for Native American Heritage Month 2020, and for more events and information, please visit our website, which we're going to link in the chat. Also, thank you to my elders and all my relations for making these events possible.
All right, bonjour, hello, welcome everyone. My name is Andrea Wilkerson and I am the Program Manager Lead for Native American Heritage Month at the Office of Multi-Ethnic Student Affairs. And I am multitasking, opening the waiting room as I go, so thank you for your patience. I'm so thrilled to be here with you all tonight celebrating Heritage Month at University of Michigan, which we formally recognize in November each year. This year, we're getting started a little bit early, as you can tell, due to the unique nature of the fall academic calendar and everything going on. So at this time, since this is our first event, we wanted to do a quick round of introductions of the rest of our planning committee. So when I give you all a shout out, please come off of mute and say hello to everyone. And I will just go in the order that I see folks. So if we can start with Cheyenne.
Hi everyone, I'm Cheyenne Marlin. I am the Assistant Director of the UP Scholars Program. I am so excited to be here for this first event. I'm an enrolled member of the Grand Traverse Band here in Michigan, and it's just really exciting to see everyone here. So thank you, Andrea.
Yeah, definitely. And can we hear from Jasmine?
Bonjour everyone, my name is Jasmine Palicki and I'm the Outreach and Engagement Specialist at the library. And I'm a member of the Secaucus Band of Lakes Superior, Chippewa, and very happy to see everyone here. Thank you.
All right, Jaime.
Hi everybody, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi all, I'm Northern Pomo from the Hobin Band of Pomo Indians. I'm a third-year graduate student in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology.
Awesome. And Caitlin?
Hello, I'm Caitlin. I'm a U of M and NASA alum, and I'm Mexican and Ilocana, and I'm very excited to see everyone and excited to have Heather back as well. Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoy her presentation.
And Heather, oh, other Heather. Heather Gregg Murdoch, are you there? All right, we'll probably catch up with Heather in just a few. Other Heather, I realize that can be confusing. Tim, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. I'm trying to get my family to kind of calm down right now. Had family just came in, so we're all catching up real quick. But I'm glad to be here. My name's Tim King. I am a alum of the business school, Ross Business School. And when I was in school, I actually was not part of NASA, but as I've come back to the university, I decided I need to become a little more active. So I thank my relations and my elders for allowing me this opportunity, and I look forward to this presentation. Thanks, Heather.
All right, awesome. I think that's all of our committee members here so far tonight. So I'm going to hand it over to Solomon.
Hello, all. Bonjour, Ani. My name is Solomon Milner, and I'm one of the undergraduate coordinators for this year's Native American Heritage Month Planning Committee, along with my student Zoe. So I have the pleasure of introducing historian and activist Heather Bruegl. We're so happy to have you come back this year. Heather Bruegl is a member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin and first-line descendant Stockbridge Munsee. She is a graduate of Madonna University in Michigan and holds a Bachelor of Arts and Master of Arts in U.S. History. Inspired by a trip to Wounded Knee, South Dakota, a passion for Native American history was born. She has spoken for numerous groups, including the University of Michigan, College of Menominee Nation, Shawano County Historical Society, the Kenosha Civil War Museum, Stockbridge-Muncie Band of the Mohicans, and the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. She has spoken at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh for Indigenous Peoples Day 2017. Heather also opened up and spoke at the Women's March anniversary in Lansing, Michigan in January 2018. She also spoke at the first ever Indigenous Peoples March in Washington, D.C. in January of 2019. Summer 2019, she spoke at the Crazy Horse Memorial and Museum in Custer, South Dakota for their Talking Circle series. She has also become the accidental activist and speaks to different groups about intergenerational racism and trauma, and helps to bring awareness to our environment, the fight for clean water, and other issues within the Native community. A curiosity of her own heritage led her to Wisconsin, where she has researched the history of Native American tribes in the area. When Heather calls Michigan home, she has recently moved to Wisconsin and is now the Director of Cultural Affairs at the Stockbridge-Muncie community. In addition to that, she also currently travels and speaks on Native American history, including policy and activism. Tonight, Heather will present her lecture on a history of Native American activism and policy. This presentation will be broken into two different presentations, part 1 this evening and part 2 coming on Sunday, October 18th, also at 6 p.m. From the very beginning, the United States has dealt with Native Americans with a series of policies and treaties. Most of the policies were aimed at assimilation, and for many years, Native Americans were forced to live by standards set by the United States. But with the formation of the American Indian movement, they started to fight back. Learn about the beginnings of the AIM and the organized protest that they led during the occupation of Alcatraz and Wounded Knee, and also learn about the activism of the 1960s that still lives on today and how we are dealing with the issues in the Native community today. That was a little bit of a mouthful, but for this talk, we want to save questions for after the talk. So please place your questions in the chat box or raise your hand. Show appreciation with reaction emojis. And of course, I'd love for you all to adhere to Zoom policy etiquette where you keep unmuted. You can share your video and screen, but please stay unmuted. Thank you very much. And let's all welcome Heather Bruegl.
Thank you so much. Or in Mohican, Onewe, very much. I appreciate that. Konamante, my name is Heather Bruegl, and as I was so graciously introduced, I am enrolled citizen, Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, first line descendant Stockbridge-Muncie, and I'm very honored to work for the Stockbridge-Muncie right now. I want to thank NASA and the University of Michigan for allowing me to participate, I think for the 4th year in a row, for Native American Heritage Month. So this is exciting. I'm super, super stoked. It's probably one of my favorite things I look forward to all year. I appreciate the wonderful land acknowledgement that we had at the beginning, acknowledging the Anishinaabe and the Three Fires Council. I also want to let you know I am coming to you from Northeast Wisconsin. Where I live is the original and ancestral homeland of the Menominee Nation. And so I want to make that acknowledgement and hope that I am doing the ancestors proud by talking to you today about policy and activism. So this actually, it's kind of, kismet, I think, because this particular lecture was the first one I ever did outside of school. It's kind of the one that launched everything. It launched me into having numerous requests to do presentations and things like that. So it's kind of nice to come back and to do this one. As it was stated, this lecture is going to be broken into 2 parts because it is a lot of information and I don't want you to fall asleep. And so what we're going to do is tonight I'm going to talk to you about policy because number 1, policy is my jam and I love it. It's my favorite. But so activism doesn't just happen. There's something that leads to it that makes it happen. So I think it's super important to talk about what came before and what led the Native American communities and tribal nations to be able to, to say, hey, hold on, we got to fix this. So a couple of things, couple of just housekeeping notes. I use the terms Native American, Indian, and indigenous interchangeably. You hear Indian a lot when talking about policy, because that's just how it was written. We have Columbus to thank for that. So we have just, and when you look at American policy, US policy written about Native Americans, they do use the word Indian. So I use that interchangeably. It's not meant as an insult to anyone. It's just how the laws are written. The other thing is Native American history and even policy can be kind of depressing. So every now and then I might crack a joke, and it's okay to laugh. I say that, I know we're virtual this year, but it's okay to crack a little joke. It's fine. And then the last thing I'm going to say is there's an underlying goal to every single policy that the United States had towards Native nations, and that was assimilation and having us follow a more Eurocentric lifestyle. I am in no way, shape, or form have anything against non-Native people, against white people. That's just not who I am in nature. It might come across that way, but that's just the history that was written. So I just want to make that clear from the start. I'm married a white guy, so it's totally fine. So that's just, but the underlying goal of every policy was assimilation and a more Eurocentric lifestyle. So that's just how we start. So tonight we're going to talk about a history of Native American policy. I'm going to talk to you about a lot in a short amount of time. So please, and I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions because I think that's super important. So again, like they said at the beginning, put your questions in that chat box and I will answer as many as I possibly can. So let's see if I did this right with my shared screening. Woohoo! Okay, so before we jump into the Indian Removal Act, I first want to talk to you that treaties were used to remove Native Americans from their land. And when those treaties were broken and the land was taken, they just made new treaties. So that's kind of how we get this start. In the 19th century, about the mid-19th century, settlers were moving into the areas of Alabama and Mississippi. They petitioned the government to remove the Native Americans that were living there because, believe it or not, there were Native Americans living there. Presidents Jefferson and Monroe kind of they didn't really like act on this. They told the Native nations there that, if you leave here and you go west, we'll trade your lands, blah, blah, blah. But they were very lackadaisical about it. They didn't really do a lot. It was never enforced. It wasn't until 1814 when a guy by the name of General Andrew Jackson defeated the Creeks at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend and forced a treaty for them to surrender 20 million acres of land. And today this would have been half of Alabama and about a fifth of Georgia. So that's a lot of land. And Jackson actually helped pave the way for 9 of the 11 major land cession treaties for those tribes living in the southeastern part of the United States. Now, when we focus on Indian removal, a lot of times we focus on what happened in the southeast part of the United States because it is so large what happened, but I want to make a note that removal happened across the entire United States. So it wasn't just what happened in the southeast. There were tribes in the north that were forced removed as well. For example, the tribes that I am part of, the Oneida and the Stockbridge Munsee, were eastern tribes, and now we live in Wisconsin. So there was some removal there. But so when we start with Indian policy, you could start prior to the formation of the United States, but I want to start with the Indian Removal Act because I think it's so pertinent to what happened. And as research and things grow, and as I grow as a historian, I really would like to point out, I think the catalyst for the Indian Removal Act was really the Louisiana Purchase. I think when Thomas Jefferson bought that large tract of land, that opened up the door for Jackson to do what he was able to do in the 1830s. So I think that's super important. So even though we're focusing on just Native policy, there were outside forces that cause all of this to happen. So that's just part of being a historian and looking at it in different ways. So the Indian Removal Act, as you can see on the screen, it was signed into law by Andrew Jackson. I like to joke and say he was our best friend. He signed it on May 28th, 1830. And what this act did is it authorized the President of the United States to grant unsettled lands to Native Americans west of the Mississippi in exchange for lands that they had that were already in formed state boundaries, so those colonized boundaries. There was a period of voluntary migration, but only a few tribes moved during that time. This included some of the Creeks, some of the Cherokee, and some of the Choctaws. The Choctaws were actually the first to sign a removal treaty, and they started to move west, but some stayed behind. And that's going to be true with any removal. Some move, some stay behind. The Seminoles were coerced into signing a removal treaty, and many refused to leave, and that actually led to the Second Seminole War. There were a number of Seminole wars, and the second one had to do with removal. The Creeks also refused to leave, but they signed a treaty that would guarantee them at least protector rights over the land, but it didn't protect them from speculators. So in 1836, the Creeks were forcibly removed from their homelands. The Chickasaws saw that moving was inevitable and they were going to have to do it. They signed a treaty with the federal government for suitable land in the West and protection until they moved. However, white settlers were too much for the federal government to handle, and they backed out of the treaty. The Chickasaws were forced to pay the Choctaws for the right to live on part of their allotment because they had to move much faster than they anticipated. In the North, in the Old Northwest, which Michigan was part of the Old Northwest, Wisconsin as well. Wisconsin was actually Michigan territory. Michigan territory was very big. It was like Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. It went to the Dakotas. It was very large. The tribes were smaller, and the removal process was more piecemealed. The Shawnee, Ottawa, Potawatomi, Sac, and Fox signed treaties and moved into Indian Territory. In 1832, the Black Hawk War, not the Black Hawk War, but Black Hawk himself ended up leading a band of Sac and Fox back to their homelands in Illinois, and that led to the Black Hawk War. Tribes that were further east, the Lenape, the Kickapoo, were removed from Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio, and the Potawatomi were forced to out in 1838, and they resettled in Kansas, in the eastern part of Kansas. So I know there was a huge Supreme Court ruling right now that basically said that that whole side of Kansas was Indian territory, and a lot of where the tribes were moved to is in that area. In 1831, the Cherokee decided they were going to challenge this, and they took their case for staying on the land to the Supreme Court in a case called Worcester versus Georgia. They used a Georgia law that stated that white settlers couldn't live on Indian land without written permission from the state. And the Supreme Court ruled in the favor of the Cherokee. They said, you know what, you have a point there. The state refused to enforce the law, though, and President Jackson refused to uphold the Supreme Court decision. He said, basically, they ruled on it, let them try to enforce it. So after the Cherokees, after winning their Supreme Court case, they signed a treaty. Jackson had obtained the signatures of a Cherokee chief agreeing to relocation. The Cherokee were given 2 years to voluntarily move. But by 1838, 16,000 were still on the land and they refused to leave. So in order to get them to leave, Jackson sent in 7,000 armed US military troops to make the Cherokee move at gunpoint. They were not allowed to gather any of their belongings, and their homes were looted by white settlers as they left. So they were basically seeing this happen. And that led to an event that was known as the Trail of Tears. And along that Trail of Tears, 4,000 Native Americans lost their life to disease, cold, and hunger. By the 1840s, with the exception of a small band of Seminoles, there were basically no tribes that resided in the southeastern part of the United States from the Atlantic to the Mississippi. a total of 50,000 Native Americans were moved off their land. And this is the important part to remember of what happened from this act. Not only were about 50,000 Native Americans moved off of their land, but it opened 25 million acres of land to white settlement and the spread of slavery. I think that's very important to point that out and to note that this act see, everything leads onto itself. There's always things that are happening. So the Louisiana Purchase leads to Indian removal leads to the spread of slavery and plantations and things like that. So it's very, very detrimental, and it's awful. So that is Indian removal in a nutshell. I could go on to it for hours. Next, we're going to move to the Dawes Act, also known as General Allotment, and that was in 1887. The Dawes Act was named for a man by the name of Senator Henry Dawes. He was born in Massachusetts in 1816 and graduated from Yale in 1839. He served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1857 to 1875, and then as a U.S. Senator from 1875 to 1893. And while he was in the Senate, he was chairman of the Committee on Indian Affairs, which is a committee that still exists today, still called Indian Affairs, by the way. And he put his focus on laws that he saw as beneficial to Native Americans. So in his own way, anything he did, he thought he was doing to help Native Americans. After his time in the Senate, he served as chairman of the commission created to administer the tribal affairs of the 5 civilized tribes in Indian Territory from 1893 to 1903, and he died in February of 1930. So he lived a really long time. But what he did while he was in the Senate is he created this General Allotment Act. And the General Allotment Act focused on breaking up reservation land into allotments for individual Native Americans. So taking a great deal of land and breaking it up, cutting it, giving everyone pieces. The reason behind this was that if a man was given a plot of land to take care of and to farm, that he would dress in white man's clothing and that he would eventually give up his Indian ways and would assimilate into proper society. Thus, the United States would no longer have to act as a parent anymore. So there is a very paternalistic relationship between the United States government and Native nations. And I also just want to take a time out to warn you, I have 3 dogs who all of a sudden became very active. So if they bark, I apologize, but they should be good. But previous to the Dawes Act, reservation land was owned loosely because we don't believe in that you can own land. By all members of a tribe communally. So it was in everybody's best interest to have it together. Anyone that was registered on tribal rolls were eligible for an allotment. And the creation of tribal rolls is a whole other conversation to have. I have a whole other lecture on blood quantum that lasts like an hour and a half because it's so complicated. So I'm not going to really get into that. If you have a question about it, you can put it in the chat and I'll maybe touch on it. But so if you were on a tribal roll, you were eligible for an allotment. There were some groups that were exempt from this act, and that was the Cherokees, the Creeks, the Choctaws, the Chickasaw, the Seminoles, and Osage. They were already in Indian Territory. This also extended to the Seneca Nation of New York and the Lakota Nation next to Nebraska. However, everything's all up for change. In 1893, this would change when the Dawes Commission negotiated with the Cherokees, Creeks, Choctaw, Chickasaws, and Seminoles, also known as the 5 civilized tribes, for allotted lands in exchange for abolishment of tribal government. So that's a whole big thing. In order to receive allotments, each tribal member had to register with the BIA, also known as the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Which it is still known as today. While this act was meant to protect Native American rights, it did the exact opposite. So regardless of whether Henry Dawes had good intentions in his heart, his plan backfired. The land that was allotted was not suitable for farming as was the plan. The plan was if you get a piece of land, you're going to farm it and it's going to be great. The land wasn't suitable for farming, and we hadn't mechanized farming yet. So we didn't know that we could farm in Oklahoma just yet. And many Native Americans couldn't or didn't want to take up farming because it wasn't their traditional way of life. And those who did want to take it up, farming is extremely expensive. Where do you get the funds to do it? I am living in an area that is surrounded by farms, big farms, big farms. I'm in the dairy state. So I'm supplying the people who live around me are supplying you your milk and cheese. And these farms are massive, and the amount of equipment and things that they have is unreal. So how do you even afford to be able to do that? And Native Americans did not have the funds to do this. So this leads to a court case, which is Lone Wolf versus Hitchcock. And Lone Wolf was a Kiowa chief that was living in the Indian Territory that was created by the Medicine Lodge Treaty in 1867. This treaty required that 3/4 of all male Native Americans living in that territory, which included the Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache, they had to agree before any changes were made. In 1892, Congress tried to make alterations to Indian Territory by trying to open up 2 million acres of reservation land to non-native settlers. Lone Wolf filed a complaint on behalf of all three tribes, stating that this change violated the 1867 treaty, which of course it absolutely did. And the year is 2020 right now, and we're no stranger to treaties being violated. But back then, we were kind of like, hold up, you're going to follow the law, right? So the case goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ultimately ruled that Congress could dispose of a reservation land without gaining consent set forth by the treaty. It also stated that Congress could void treaty obligations with Native Americans because they had inherent absolute power. Inherent absolute power. This case, Lone Wolf versus Hitchcock, has been referred to as the Dred Scott decision for the Native American community, because the inferiority of Native Americans was put on paper for the first time. And if you recall, in the Dred Scott decision, Justice Taney of the Supreme Court said that the Black man has no rights that a white man needs to acknowledge. And that was basically the same thing that was said here, is Congress has absolute or inherent absolute power to just void a treaty whenever it wants. So because of that, 90,000 Native Americans were left landless. Under the Coolidge administration, so Calvin Coolidge, we flash forward to the 1920s, there was a study of the Dawes Act and its repercussions on Native communities. And in 1928, the administration found that the Dawes Act had been used illegally to take lands from Native Americans. So we had to wait until 1928 for a government to say what we already knew, is that the Dawes Act acted illegally to take lands away from Native Americans. So it was a hot mess. And again, you see this time and time throughout history. You have people who want to act as allies for the Native community, who truly believe in their heart they are doing something good, when all it does is backfire and causes more problems in the community than they originally thought. So we're going to flash forward a bit to 1924 with the Citizenship Act. Why was a Citizenship Act needed? Well, if you hadn't figured it out by now, Native Americans who were living here way before Columbus discovered this continent back in 1492, after the creation of the United States in 1776, our removal in 1830, our fighting in the American Revolution. I'm proud to say I come from ancestors who fought in the American Revolution to secure our freedom. 1860s, we had Native nations fighting on both sides of the Civil War. whether they were fighting for the Confederacy or fighting for the Union to keep the country together, fighting in World War I, we were not citizens of the United States. We were doing all of this out of the goodness of our hearts. We were doing this because that was in our nature. We are fighters, we are warriors. This is part of what we do. We help fight on the side of good, but we were doing it all while not citizens of the United States. So we weren't fully recognized. Citizenship was limited to those who were half blood or less. Again, that's a whole lecture on blood quantum that I can't go into because it would take forever. In 1919, after World War I, veterans received citizenship. Some women received citizenship through marriage to white men, others through allotment or military service. There were more who would receive citizenship if they gave up tribal status, or if the government deemed them qualified to become citizens. If the federal government said, all right, we think you have become civilized enough, you can become a citizen. That's how you received it. But there was a real push after World War I for citizenship to be granted because our veterans were not being taken care of. They were missing out on the benefits that you got from serving in the US military, and they weren't acknowledged. There was no rhyme or reason to them. So on June 2nd, 1924, official citizenship was granted to Native Americans born within the United States. The Nationality Act of 1940 granted citizenship to all Native Americans born on U.S. soil. Citizenship had its good parts and its bad parts. Those who were part of the more mainstream culture, who embraced, who went to Eurocentric schools to learn English and the ways of, mainstream society, saw this as a good thing. More traditionalists saw this as a bad thing. The government looked at it as a way of, if we give these people citizenship, we can absorb them. They will be part of our mainstream Eurocentric society, and they're not going to, bother with all this Indian stuff. And so it was good and it was bad. My grandfather was like 13 before he was a citizen of the United States, of the country he was born in. So that's like insane to think about it, that I have a direct connection to somebody who wasn't granted citizenship until 1924. But just because we could be citizens didn't mean we could actually vote. And I want to stress that this year because, number one, there's an election coming up if you didn't know about it, if your head was in the sand somewhere. Number two, 2020 is the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, the passage of the 19th Amendment. And while I am forever grateful to women like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Alice Paul, Lucretia Mott, thank you for fighting on my behalf. The truth is, it wasn't until the early 1960s that all Native Americans could actually vote. And it wasn't until the certification of the Voting Rights Act that vote was then solidified for us, and it wasn't going to be taken away. So we got citizen in 1924, but we still couldn't, not all of us could vote until the early 1960s when Utah finally passed voting rights for Native Americans. So I think that's important in a year of several elections and in a year where we're celebrating suffrage, women's suffrage. It is important to point out that still not every single woman could vote. So very important to point that out. So we move from citizenship to the IRA. Not to be confused with the IRA in Ireland, but Indian Reorganization Act. The act was introduced by a man named John Collier, who was the Commissioner of Indian Affairs. He was a sociologist, a writer, and an advocate for the Native American community. He grew up in Atlanta and he was educated at Columbia. In 1920, he spent a year living in Taos, New Mexico, and he was learning about the Pueblos. When he left in 1921, he believed that the Native way of life and culture was threatened by the encroachment of a dominant white culture and policies directed at their assimilations. So Collier saw something that other people didn't see. He formed the American Indian Defense Association in 1923 to fight for Indian rights. He was named commissioner in 1933, and even after he left office, he remained active in the fight for Indian rights until his death in 1968. What the IRA did is it attempted to undo some of the harm caused by the Dawes Act. It ended the policy of allotment and banned the future sales of Native American land, meaning now that any Native American land that had not been allotted or sold was going to be returned to the tribes. The exception was land that had already been sold to non-Native people. That meant that some of the former reservations now had a checkerboard pattern. And if you look up a map of the United States, if you focus on reservations, you'll see that there's like missing parts inside reservations, and gives it this checkerboard pattern. And that's because that was due to allotment. And one of the best examples I love to give is if you look up the Oneida Reservation here in Wisconsin in Green Bay, it's a hot mess. It is like this block is reservation and the next block isn't. It's very checkerboarded. So that's a very good example to look at. The government could also purchase the fee land and return it to tribal trust status. More than 2 million acres of land were returned to various tribes. It granted Native American communities some measure of governmental and judicial autonomy, that if they were modeled after the United States, and I find that phrase funny because the United States modeled its form of government after the Haudenosaunee form of government. So if you modeled your form of government after the United States form of government that already modeled itself after a Native form of government, then you could form your government and judicial autonomy. So just a little, if you're ever on Jeopardy, the United States government was modeled after Haudenosaunee. So very interesting. Allotment, though, took a heavy toll on many tribes, and many customs and traditions were lost. Traditional Native Americans questioned the act and saw it as another way to live in white institutions. There were mixed reactions to the IRA. Some praised John Collier for the work that he was doing, while others criticized him. And anthropologists later on criticized Collier for not recognizing the diversity of Native lifestyles, and that we weren't all just a monolith, that we were different and we were unique and we had different ways of life. Because remember, his first experience was with the Pueblos down in New Mexico, but not every tribe is like a Southwest tribe, are very different. The act, though, would ultimately lead to the policy of termination. And termination lasted from 1953 to 1968. And what happened was in 1943, there was a survey of living conditions on Native American reservations. And what they found was horrible. They found that there was extreme poverty. And it was decided that Native Americans needed to be moved more so into the mainstream culture. And so a policy of termination was adopted. And it was said that the tribes no longer needed to be under the protection of the federal government. In 1953, the federal government officially adopted this policy, meaning that they declared that they wanted to, as quickly as possible, make every Native American within the territorial United States subject to the same laws, privileges, and responsibilities as everybody else. On the surface, it sounds like a good idea. But what happens is, from it severed all treaty responsibility and all obligations on the side of the federal government. So treaties are contracts, they're legal contracts. And what termination did is it stopped those contracts from being enforced. They didn't exist anymore. So from 1953 to 1964, 109 tribes were terminated with responsibility and jurisdiction handed over to the states. 2.5 million acres of land were taken, and thousands of Native Americans lost their tribal status. So while on the surface it sounds like something that's a good thing, underneath it, it was bad. You lost your tribal status, you lost your reservation land, and you were introduced to things that you'd never been introduced before. Land was again sold to non-natives, and official recognition of tribes was no longer there. So, we have over 570 federally recognized tribes. During termination policy, that didn't exist anymore. Federal services and protections were taken away and reservations vanished. Much of the termination policy that was designed to help tribes backfired. Education was affected. And the example that I use is the Menominee Nation of Wisconsin experienced a 75% school dropout rate. Why? Because you had to pay something now that was called land taxes. So you had to leave school in order to get a job that would pay. But tribal schools were also funded by those treaty annuities that people were getting. And now you weren't getting annuities anymore. So how are you going to fund your tribal schools? Indian health services were unable to provide health care because they were now deemed ineligible. They were no longer getting the annuities to help keep clinics open. There was an increase in taxes and high unemployment rate and moved many Native Americans not into poverty, but into a lower poverty rate than they were already in. So the study that they did in 1943 showed that Native Americans were already living in extreme poverty, and termination then took that one step further and moved them down. There was a fight, obviously, to have termination reversed. Many tribes tried to fight it, but with limited funds, they weren't able to. And so it lasted an extremely long time. So, and in the midst of that, that led to Indian relocation. And this was a law that was intended to encourage Native Americans throughout the United States to leave reservations and acquire skills to assimilate again into mainstream society. It was part of the termination era. And at that time, the policy was happening that the federal government was cutting subsidies to reservations in hopes of actually getting rid of the reservation system. The act didn't technically force people to leave reservation areas, but it made it significantly harder to stay. Benefits of this policy included paid some moving expenses and vocational training, provided funds to buy tools needed for vocational training, a per diem for both the time it took to relocate and for 4 weeks after relocation. It provided grants to purchase work clothing, household goods, tuition costs, and in some cases, a grant to purchase a home. In 1947, Julius Krug, the Secretary of the Interior, which the Bureau of Indian Affairs falls under, suggested a 10-year program for the Navajo and Hopi to provide vocational training. The program became law in 1950, and under the Navajo Hopi law, the program was funded and helped move people to Los Angeles, Salt Lake City, and Denver. In 1950, 6%, only about 6% of Native Americans were living in urban areas. In 1951, the BIA began extending this program from the Hopi and the Navajo to other areas, to other tribes who were living in areas of Oklahoma, New Mexico, California, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. The following year, the program was extended to all Native Americans. In 1955, the BIA had relocation offices in Cleveland, Dallas, Minneapolis, Oklahoma City, St. Louis, and other large cities. And I believe Detroit was one of them, but I'm not 100% sure. Having the relocation offices in larger cities with more jobs were available was to reduce poverty of Native Americans. By 1954, approximately 6,400 Native Americans were living in urban areas. By 1960, more than 31,000 were living in the cities. Between 1950 and 1980, there were more than 750,000 Native Americans moved to the cities through the relocation program or on their own accord. In the 2000 census, the urban Native American population was 64% higher than that of pre-termination. But not everything worked out. You still ran into barriers. Those who relocated oftentimes felt isolated. There was a loss of tradition and culture. They faced racial discrimination and segregation. There was job discrimination. And many times you could only find low-paying jobs, so you were still living in poverty. So there wasn't a lot of good that was coming in, and you were losing rights, and you were being discriminated against. And the Indian Relocation Act was a huge call for why the American Indian movement was formed, and we'll learn more about that on Sunday. Moving quickly now to the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968. Prior to the passage of the Indian Civil Rights Act, the Supreme Court made it clear that tribal internal affairs concerning tribal members' individual rights were not covered by the Fifth Amendment. And the Fifth Amendment is self-incrimination and double jeopardy. But in the same breath, tribes were subjected to the power of the Congress and the Constitution. So did the Bill of Rights apply to us? Did it not apply to us? Who knows? So just like any other government that is, that we have, whether it's your school government, whether it is the United States government, whether it is your local government, even Indian governments were subject to corruption. Corruption does not just pick and choose. It can happen anywhere. So rights were being suppressed federally and by your tribal governments in some cases. I'm not saying all tribal governments are corrupt. I'm saying it can happen though. But with the passage of the Indian Civil Rights Act, what it did is it allowed tribal members to have full access to the Bill of Rights in the United States Constitution. Tribal courts have to afford due process, and they have to enforce the other civil liberties that are stated there. There are some differences, though, between the Bill of Rights and the Indian Civil Rights Act. While it guarantees freedom of religion, it does not stop a tribe from establishing a religion and understands that many tribes do not separate religion from government and other areas of life. It also guarantees a criminal defendant the right to an attorney at the defendant's expense, but a tribe does not have to provide an attorney if the defendant cannot afford one. And there is no right to a jury trial in civil cases under the Indian Civil Rights Act. So while while there is a lot that's the same, there are some differences, particularly that religion one, where we do know that our religion and our traditions are important and they seep into every part of our tribal life. Finally, we have Self-Determined and Education Act in 1975. And this policy was first introduced by President Nixon, but it was signed by President Gerald Ford because Nixon had to leave office by the time this act was passed. The act officially ended the policy of termination. The act allowed the federal government to contract once again with tribal administrations and governments for federal services. It reinstated treaty rights. So when it ended termination, it gave us back a bit of our autonomy. The BIA was first resistant to the act and wanted to retain control over how tribal affairs and how money was spent. But over time and with increased pressure from the tribes, the BIA slowly started to lessen its hold over tribal affairs, and the tribes were able to apply for and receive grant funding. The act also gave control over of Native American schools back over to the tribes, where Native language was reintroduced, and we were in charge of our own curriculum, which is super important. Self-determination gave Native Americans the opportunity to gain control over their tribal governments, which included economic development and natural resource rights. In many ways, through self-determination, helped many tribes gain back tribal government, which had been led to the implementation of tribal courts and new economic development. It gave us back our sense of autonomy and really gave us back the sense of sovereignty. So it's super important, the Indian Self-Determination and Education Act in 1975. So, but even though we had all these great things happen, there were still bad things that were happening, and we'll go more into that on Sunday when we talk about what I think is the really fun part, which is activism. I wanted to leave you with some suggested readings and documentaries to watch because I am, if anything, an educator and I want to give you resources. So books that I recommend: An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee by Dee Brown. Some great websites to visit: the National Archives and the Library of Congress. And I forgot to add this on there, but just recently the Smithsonian made available and digitized treaties for the first time that we can see, which is really exciting. I can probably get that link, and I will have that link for you available on Sunday. 100 Years is a really great documentary to watch on Netflix. And it talks about a particular case that happened where the federal government was holding back money from people in the Blackfeet Reservation, and it's really good. It's about Eloise Cobell and her work to bring justice to the Native community there. Trudell is an amazing documentary. If we'll talk a little bit more about John Trudell on Sunday, but if you know anything about him, I encourage you to watch this documentary. And then one of my favorites is The West, which is also another documentary by Ken Burns, who's an amazing video historian. And it talks about the history of the West, but what Ken Burns does is he also includes the history of the Native people in the West. So it's not this whole beautiful how the West was one kind of story. He tells everything that happened, which I think is super, super important. So I will leave the screen up for a little while, but I am, excited to answer any questions that you might have. And I am really happy to be part of this again. And I want to thank U of M and NASA and Andrea and everybody on the committee for hosting this. And I am ready for any questions that you have. So thank you guys.
We wanted to say thank you for your words this evening, and let's give Heather another round of Zoom applause and reactions. Yeah, and just to reiterate, if you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat now. One of the things that has been coming through is just appreciation. Heather said, "This is so much information I did not know. Honestly, thank you, Heather." So,
my pleasure. It's a lot. It's a lot of information. But yeah, again, I like to say that there isn't anything that's offensive that you can ask. I don't get offended that easily by things. The only thing that I do ask is if you have a question that's burning, to go ahead, type it out. You can leave your name anonymous if you want, but I want you to ask instead of leaving here thinking you know the answer, because that is offensive. So yeah.
someone asked, can you speak a little more about the Bureau of Indian Affairs being under the Department of Interior and how the indigenous community views this?
Yeah, so I've always found that very interesting that we're under the Department of the Interior. And if you know anything about the entire Department of Interior, that's land management and wildlife management, and they manage all of our great federal parks, some of which I have been to, which are amazing. I recommend you go there, especially now during the time of this pandemic. If you need to get out and you need to social distance, national parks, great place to go. But I do find it interesting, and I find it, I think it's a little telling that the Bureau of Indian Affairs, a bureau that for all intents and purposes manages people, is housed under a department that manages land and animals. So I think that's something that I've actually been pondering on a lot lately, and I feel like there's something I need to write about there. But I know for me personally, I find it a little offensive that it's not something that has been re-examined lately, something that people should, take issue with. And can we call the Bureau of Indian Affairs something else too? I mean, we're not Indians, we're not from India. We are indigenous to this land. As John Trudell said, we are the human beings. So I think that's something that we can revisit. But I do find that it's a bit telling that our federal government would put us under a department that manages wildlife and land. It's like there's something that they need to manage with us. I guess it's better than being under the Department of War back in the day, but it is still pretty interesting.
We just got a question that asks, are there ways for people to return their land to native tribes and lease land from tribes to live on instead? People as in non-native people.
I wish it was that simple. I wish if you had a piece of native land that was, part of ancestral land, that you could just give it back. I think that's a great question, but I want to point out, no matter where you are standing, you are on native land. The entire continent of North America, Turtle Island, is native land. If you are specifically talking about land that you might live on or land that you own that was belonged to a certain tribe, it is not that simple to just give it back. You can't do that. What happens is, because we're managed differently than the rest of the United States, Native communities are managed differently. So you would have to there'd have to be some sort of sale that would happen, and then that land would then be put into a fee category, and then there's a process for where that fee category, it's like a decades long process that then goes into trust, and it becomes reservation land. So it is not just as simple of, here, I'm gifting this to you. I wish it was, but it unfortunately is not. And if you are a non-native person that has no relation to, or you're not married to a native person or things like that, you just can't live on reservation land. There's a process that you have to go through to live on reservation land as well. Like, for example, I would have to apply with our land management if I wanted to live on Oneida land, let's say, because I'm enrolled Oneida. I'd have to go to our land management within the Oneida community, and I have to apply for it, and then I would get an allotment. And I know that kind of sounds like a dirty word, but it's a word that it means what it means. I'd have to get an allotment, and then I could build a home, or I could whatever, or I could also live in tribal housing if I wanted to. There are apartments and things, housing areas that people to live on. But and then my husband could live with me there. But like, my husband, who is a non-native person, couldn't just go and live on a reservation. Like, you can't just walk in and do that. Just like we couldn't go over to Canada and just live in Canada. There's a process you have to go through. And so same with Native nations. It's a little bit more strict because we want to make sure that our land is protected, and it's super important to us. But yeah, so I wish it was just as simple for the land, giving land back as like, here you go, but it's not. And it's also like, if you're a non-native person, you can't just walk onto a reservation and plop down. I mean, I guess you could if you were trying to make a point, and but we would call you a colonizer, and you don't want to do that.
We have another question by Hannah Rosenfield that asks, can you tell us a little bit about how the history of the policy fights you've described so far has shaped the ongoing discussions and themes, frames, or organizing strategies or tactics over contemporary policy issues that deal with Native American policies?
That's a great question. That's a long question. So all of these policies, and we're going to talk more about it on Sunday too, but I'll go into it just a little bit now. But all of these policies, the underlying theme of those policies has been assimilation from the start. If you read the Declaration of Independence, which I think is one of the most greatest breakup letters of all time, I'm a historian, and my favorite type of history is early colonial and the founding of the United States, and indigenous history. So it's like, those are my top two loves. But I love everything that has to do with the founding. But in that document, in the greatest breakup letter of all time, there's a line in there where Thomas Jefferson writes, and I have great admiration for Thomas Jefferson. I wrote my senior thesis on him, and John Adams. But there is a line in there that he writes that refers to the native peoples of Turtle Island as merciless Indian savages. And so from the start, we were not thought of as people. We were not thought of as human beings. And there's always been our skin was a different color, and we did things differently. We didn't have those Eurocentric normal gender roles, quote unquote. I say normal because, I mean, even in my marriage, we don't have normal gender roles. We just see what needs to get done and we do it. So we weren't right. So in the eyes of the colonists and the settlers coming over, and then again the founders and framers of the Constitution and all of that, one of the first departments to be formed was a Commission on Indian Affairs. That was one of the first things that happened. When we had our capital in New York and in Philadelphia, and then later on in Washington, D.C. But because it was what to do, how to solve the Indian problem. And they looked at it as a real problem. Because there were so many of us. I mean, prior to the arrival of Columbus, there were well over 10, 15 million people living on this continent already who called it home. And then on Sunday, we'll talk a little bit more how the numbers went down. But I think, so they didn't know what to do with us because there were so many of us. So the underlying theme there was assimilation. The whole point was to get rid of who we were, to have us put aside who we are and give up our way of life. There's the introduction of the boarding school period, which did a great deal of harm. So much harm that you still feel it today. My grandparents, so I'm just one generation removed from, went to boarding schools. That's actually how my grandparents met. They got met, fell in love, got married. But they were boarding school children. And to see the effects that boarding schools have on people, I remember asking my mother one time if my grandmother ever spoke Oneida, if she knew any words or anything. And my mom said she never talked about it. She never, mentioned it. So it was part of a way to assimilate us and to have us give up our culture. And even now, when you hear our federal government talking about the privatization of reservations, which is something we'll talk more about on Sunday, because it has been brought up since the current administration has been in office. It was actually, I think, the current leader of the United States, I think he was maybe in office a couple months when the idea of privatization of reservations came up. That's modern day termination. There's also there was an issue with Medicaid expansion and having it go to Native Americans because the current administration wanted to classify us as a race as opposed to a sovereign entity, a political entity. That has repercussions. So there are still many policies that still come up that talk about not only the elimination of our people, but the elimination of our culture and who we are. So there's still, I know I stopped in 1975 with policy, but that doesn't stop. And we're going to talk about it more on Sunday when I talk about the Indian Child Welfare Act. That was because they were taking Native children from homes for no reason. Sometimes, yes, there were legit reasons, but most of the time there weren't. And it was just a way to stop the spreading of our culture and in our history and our teachings. And so it hasn't stopped, even though I stopped in 1975. It's not over. In 2020, we're still seeing things. And there's such a misconception about who we are as people. And there's still such that racist feel towards Native Americans. Where I live in a border town. I border the Menominee Reservation, and it's 2020, and I consider myself a pretty, educated person, a pretty smart person, not at all snotty, like I want to help out my neighbor, and I still get looks and talked about as I'm walking through the grocery store. So it's not over and it's not done. And so even though the policy that I stopped talking about was in 1975, it's not over. There's still things happening in 2020 that we're still trying to overcome.
All right, we have time for just one or so more questions. It's a little bit after 7 and we'd like to honor everyone's time. One of the questions is from Danny. I've been trying to learn more about the land back movement. Do you have any resources that you'd recommend on this topic?
I don't. I didn't have a chance to put anything back, but what I would do is when you are searching online, you know what, I'm gonna make a note to myself. And Danny, if you join us on Sunday, I will hopefully have something for you. But if you are going to Google between now and then, I want to make sure that you are looking at reputable sources. For anything with the land back movement, I would check out Native news sources, because they're going to have the most accurate reporting on it. I'm not sure that there are any .govs or .edus right now that are doing anything with land back. So I would make sure that you are looking at Native news sources for that right now. But I will get you some more information on Sunday.
All right, and the last question comes from Jasmine. When it comes to the Department of the Interior, perhaps we're the last thing in the way of complete and total exploitation. Oops, it disappeared. Oh, of land and resources. Maybe it is best if we remain under the Interior for the time being.
I would agree with that statement. There's while it seems a bit odd, I get it, and it's like, where do you put us? Do you form a whole new department for us? Which I think we should, but I would totally agree with Jasmine's statement.
All right, with that, on behalf of our sponsors and the University of Michigan, I'd like to say thank you to Heather for sharing your words with us today. It is your strength, your creativity, and your determination that inspires us all. We would also want to thank all of you for joining us this evening, and we hope you can attend part 2 of this talk this coming Sunday, October 18th at 6 p.m. Be sure to visit the Native American Heritage Month website for the most up-to-date information on NAM events. We also have a lecture with Dr. Adrian Keene coming up next Thursday on October 22nd on Native representations in the media. There's a survey link being sent out in the chat as well as via email. Please complete this so we can continue to show the university why events like this are important. Thanks again for joining us today, and thank you again to Heather for sharing your knowledge with us. Happy Native American Heritage Month and Bamapi.
Thank you guys. See you Sunday.
See you Sunday. Bye-bye.